Right before we dive in, let's make this story bigger than just me and you. Tell me in the comments, what part of the world are you watching from, and what's the clock striking there? Morning, night, or somewhere in between, I want to see how far this story can reach. Now lean closer. Here's where it all begins. The bounty hunter's words hung in the desert air like smoke from a funeral pyre, each syllable driving another nail into Evangeline Rousseau's heart as she stood frozen in the doorway of her farmhouse. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but the man you're looking for, Mathieu Delacroix, he ain't the outlaw you think he is. He's been dead for 3 years, killed by the real gang leader who stole his name and his reputation." Gabriel Montclair, the weathered bounty hunter she had hired with her life savings, held his hat in his calloused hands as he delivered the news that would destroy everything she thought she knew about love, betrayal, and the man who had disappeared from her life without explanation. The wanted poster she had clutched to her chest for months, the one bearing Mathieu's face above crimes that had seemed impossible for the gentle man she had loved, fluttered to the ground like a dying bird. "But I saw him," Evangeline whispered, her voice breaking as she struggled to understand what Gabriel was telling her. 6 months ago, in the town of Esperanza, he was with the gang, leading them, wearing black like the devil himself. He looked right at me and didn't even recognize my face. The memory of that moment still cut through her like a blade. The way the man she had planned to marry had stared at her with eyes that held no recognition, no love, nothing but cold indifference. Gabriel's expression was grim as he studied the woman whose heart was breaking before his eyes, understanding that the truth he carried was more devastating than any lie. "What you saw was Claude Moreau, the real leader of the Devil's Canyon gang. He's been using dead men's names and faces to stay ahead of the law, surgery and makeup changing his appearance to match wanted posters of men who can't defend their reputations from the grave." The implications of Gabriel's revelation crashed over Evangeline like an avalanche, because if Mathieu had been dead for 3 years, then everything she thought she knew about his betrayal, his abandonment, and his transformation into an outlaw had been a cruel illusion. But if that was true, then the man she had been hunting for revenge was innocent, and the real monster was still out there, using her beloved's face to commit unspeakable crimes. 3 years and 6 months earlier, Evangeline Rousseau had been living the kind of life that frontier women dreamed about: a successful ranch, a thriving business partnership with the local trading post, and the love of a man whose gentle nature was matched only by his fierce dedication to protecting the innocent. Mathieu Delacroix had arrived in Redemption Valley with nothing but the clothes on his back and skills with horses that bordered on magical, but he had built a life of meaning and purpose through honest work and genuine compassion. Their courtship had been the talk of the territory, a romance that seemed pulled from the pages of a dime novel about true love conquering all obstacles. Mathieu's past was mysterious. He spoke little about his life before arriving in the valley, but his actions in the present were so consistently honorable that nobody questioned where he had come from or why he seemed to have skills with firearms that he never used for violence. The ranch they had built together was more than just a business. It was a sanctuary for people who needed fresh starts, employing former outlaws who wanted to go straight and providing refuge for women escaping violent situations. Mathieu's ability to see the good in damaged people had created a community of loyalty and redemption that made their property a beacon of hope in a harsh landscape where mercy was often seen as weakness. Their wedding had been planned for the spring of 1872, with the entire valley invited to celebrate a union that represented everything positive about frontier life: the possibility of transformation, the power of love to heal old wounds, and the promise that even the most broken people could find family and belonging in the vast wilderness of the American West. Evangeline had never been happier than in those months of preparation, planning a future that seemed golden with possibility. But 2 weeks before their wedding, Mathieu had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note that spoke of danger coming to the valley and the need to draw it away from innocent people. "I love you more than life itself," the note had said, "but loving you means keeping you safe, even if that means staying away forever." The abandonment had broken more than Evangeline's heart. It had shattered her faith in love, truth, and the possibility that happiness could last in a world built on violence and betrayal. The wanted poster had appeared in every town within 100 miles, bearing Mathieu's face above charges that made Evangeline's blood run cold. Bank robbery, murder, kidnapping, and leading a gang of cutthroats who terrorized settlements across 3 territories. The crimes described were so brutal and senseless that they seemed to have been committed by a completely different person than the gentleman who had once rescued injured animals and read poetry by lamplight. Evangeline's first reaction had been denial, then anger, then a grief so profound that she had barely been able to function for weeks after seeing evidence of Mathieu's transformation into everything he had once opposed. The man she had loved had become the leader of the Devil's Canyon gang, his face staring out from wanted posters with eyes that seemed cold and cruel in ways she had never seen during their time together. The descriptions of his crimes grew more horrific with each new poster. Entire families murdered during robberies, women kidnapped and never seen again, towns burned for the simple pleasure of watching them burn. The bounty on his head climbed steadily as his reputation for violence spread, reaching $5,000 for his capture dead or alive, a sum that attracted every bounty hunter and glory-seeking gunman from Mexico to Canada. But what had finally driven Evangeline to action was the report of the Devil's Canyon gang's attack on a church social in the town of Esperanza, where witnesses described how the gang leader had personally executed a minister who tried to protect the collection money. The cold-blooded murder of a man of God had been the final straw that convinced her that the Mathieu she had loved was truly dead, replaced by a monster who needed to be stopped before he could hurt more innocent people. The decision to hire a bounty hunter had been the hardest choice of her life, but Evangeline knew she lacked the skills and experience to track down someone as dangerous as Mathieu had become. Gabriel Montclair's reputation for bringing in the worst outlaws alive had made him the obvious choice, even though using her savings to pay for hunting the man she had once planned to marry felt like cutting out her own heart with a rusty knife. Gabriel Montclair was everything the frontier needed in a bounty hunter: methodical, relentless, and skilled enough to bring in dangerous men without becoming a monster himself in the process. His reputation had been built over 15 years of tracking the worst criminals the territories had to offer, but unlike many men in his profession, he had never lost his humanity or his sense of justice in the pursuit of blood money. Standing 6 feet tall with prematurely gray hair and eyes the color of winter sky, Gabriel carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had survived by being better prepared and more patient than his quarry. His weapons were well maintained but not flashy, his clothes practical rather than intimidating, and his manner suggested a professional who took pride in his work without enjoying the violence it sometimes required. What set Gabriel apart from other bounty hunters was his obsession with truth. He had never brought in an innocent man, never collected a bounty he hadn't earned honestly, and never used unnecessary violence when capture was possible. His methods involved exhaustive investigation, careful tracking, and patient surveillance that often took months to complete, but resulted in captures that held up in court and stayed caught. The stories about Gabriel's captures had become legends throughout the territories. The time he tracked a killer through a blizzard for 6 days, the elaborate disguise he had used to infiltrate a gang and capture its leader from within. The way he had talked a desperate man out of killing hostages by appealing to his love for his children. Gabriel understood that most outlaws were broken people rather than evil ones, and he tried to treat them with the humanity that the law often forgot. When Evangeline had approached him about hunting Mathieu Delacroix, Gabriel had initially refused the contract. Not because of the danger, but because of something in her story that didn't ring true to his experienced ears. The transformation she described, from gentle rancher to vicious gang leader, was the kind of change that happened gradually or not at all, and Gabriel's instincts told him there were missing pieces to this puzzle that needed to be found before justice could be properly served. Gabriel's investigation into the Devil's Canyon gang began not with tracking outlaws, but with examining the evidence that had convinced everyone of Mathieu Delacroix's guilt, starting with the wanted posters that had appeared so suddenly and spread so widely across the territories. What he found immediately raised questions that nobody else had thought to ask. The timing, the distribution, and the perfect quality of the photograph suggested resources and coordination that simple outlaws rarely possessed. The first witness Gabriel interviewed was the bank clerk in Silver Creek who had identified Mathieu as the leader of the gang that had robbed the First National Bank. But under careful questioning, the clerk admitted that the identification had been made from a photograph shown to him by federal marshals rather than from his own memory of the robbery, and that the actual gang leader had worn a bandana that covered most of his face during the crime. Gabriel's examination of the crime scenes revealed inconsistencies that painted a troubling picture, evidence that seemed too perfect, witnesses whose stories changed between tellings, and physical evidence that suggested the crimes had been committed by someone trying very hard to implicate a specific person rather than simply escape justice. The pattern suggested a deliberate campaign to destroy Mathieu's reputation and frame him for crimes he hadn't committed. The breakthrough came when Gabriel discovered that several of the witnesses who had identified Mathieu had received substantial payments from unknown sources shortly after giving their testimony to federal authorities. The money had been delivered by intermediaries who claimed to represent grateful citizens, but the amounts and timing suggested coordination by someone with significant resources and detailed knowledge of the legal system. But the most disturbing discovery was that the real Mathieu Delacroix had been buried in an unmarked grave outside the town of Broken Arrow, killed during a stagecoach robbery that had occurred 6 months before the first crime attributed to him by the wanted posters. Gabriel's investigation revealed that Mathieu had died trying to protect passengers from the very gang that was now using his identity, making him a victim rather than a perpetrator of the violence that had destroyed his reputation and broken Evangeline's heart. The man calling himself Mathieu Delacroix was actually Claude Moreau, a criminal genius whose specialty was stealing the identities of dead men to stay ahead of bounty hunters and federal marshals who might recognize his real face. Gabriel's research revealed that Moreau had been using this technique for years, assuming the names and appearances of murdered victims to create confusion and misdirection that had allowed him to operate with near impunity across multiple territories. Moreau's transformation abilities were enhanced by his background as a theatrical performer before the war, skills that allowed him to change his appearance through makeup, posture, and vocal techniques that could fool even people who had known his victims personally. Combined with surgical alterations performed by a disgraced doctor who traveled with the gang, Moreau could become almost anyone he chose, making him nearly impossible to track or identify. The Devil's Canyon gang itself was more sophisticated than typical outlaw groups, operating like a military unit with discipline, planning, and coordination that suggested professional training and leadership. Gabriel's investigation revealed that several gang members were former soldiers who had served under Moreau during the war, bound to him by shared experiences and mutual dependence that made them exceptionally loyal and dangerous. But Moreau's most insidious tactic was his deliberate targeting of good men whose reputations he could steal along with their identities, choosing victims whose character and appearance would provide perfect camouflage for his criminal activities. By becoming men who were trusted and respected in their communities, Moreau could operate in plain sight while his victims' families and friends struggled to understand how someone they had loved could have become so evil. Gabriel's investigation revealed that at least 6 other men had been murdered by Moreau's gang, specifically so their identities could be stolen. Their deaths made to look like accidents or random violence while Moreau studied their lives and relationships to prepare for his impersonations. The systematic nature of these murders revealed a level of premeditation and cruelty that went far beyond simple criminal greed, suggesting that Moreau actually enjoyed destroying the lives and reputations of good people almost as much as he enjoyed the profits from his crimes. When Gabriel returned to Evangeline's ranch with the evidence he had gathered, the truth he carried was more devastating than any lie, because it meant that her beloved Mathieu had died as heroically as he had lived, while his memory had been systematically destroyed by the very criminals he had tried to stop. The wanted posters, the witness testimonies, and the crimes attributed to his name were all elaborate fabrications designed to protect Claude Moreau while devastating the people who had loved the real Mathieu Delacroix. Evangeline's reaction to the truth was a mixture of relief and rage that left her shaking as she processed the implications of what Gabriel was telling her. Relief that the man she had loved had never betrayed her or become the monster depicted in the wanted posters, but rage that his murder and the theft of his identity had been ignored by authorities who had been too eager to close cases to investigate the inconsistencies in the evidence against him. "He died, protecting innocent people," Gabriel said gently, watching Evangeline's face as she struggled to reconcile the truth with months of believing that love had transformed into evil. "The stagecoach robbery where they killed him. He was traveling to see you, carrying the wedding ring he had bought in Denver. They found it on his body. But by then Moreau was already using his name and face to commit crimes that made that ring evidence of guilt rather than love. The revelation that Mathieu had been coming home to her when he was murdered added another layer of tragedy to an already devastating story, because it meant that his disappearance had been involuntary rather than abandonment, death rather than betrayal. The note he had left about drawing danger away from the valley had been prophetic in ways he couldn't have imagined, because his murder had indeed protected her from becoming Moreau's next victim. But Gabriel's investigation had also revealed that Moreau wasn't finished with his impersonation of Mathieu Delacroix, and that the gang leader's ultimate plan involved returning to Redemption Valley to claim the ranch and the woman who had been Mathieu's greatest treasure. The hunter Gabriel carried the knowledge that they were not just seeking justice for past crimes, but racing to prevent future ones that would destroy everything Mathieu had died trying to protect. Gabriel's proposal for stopping Claude Moreau was as dangerous as it was necessary. They would use Evangeline as bait to draw the impostor into a confrontation where his crimes could be exposed, and his reign of terror ended permanently. The plan required Evangeline to publicly announce her intention to marry Mathieu when he returned to claim his ranch, creating an irresistible opportunity for Moreau to complete his theft of the real Mathieu's life by claiming his bride as well. "He won't be able to resist," Gabriel explained as they planned the trap that would either bring justice or get them both killed. "Moreau's obsession with becoming his victims completely means he'll want to experience every aspect of Mathieu's life, including the love that was waiting for him. But his knowledge of Mathieu's personality and history will be imperfect, based on observation and research rather than lived experience, and those gaps will be how we expose him." The preparation for their plan required Evangeline to overcome months of grief and betrayal to convincingly play the role of a woman still in love with a man she now knew was dead, while Gabriel positioned himself as a hired hand on the ranch where he could observe and protect without revealing his true identity. The performance would be emotionally devastating for Evangeline, but it was the only way to bring Moreau close enough to face justice for his crimes. Gabriel's experience with theatrical criminals had taught him that the best way to catch them was to give them a stage where their vanity would overcome their caution, and Moreau's need to prove his perfect impersonation of Mathieu would make him vulnerable to traps that would be obvious to a more careful criminal. The key was creating a scenario where Moreau's ego would convince him that he had completely fooled everyone, lowering his guard just enough for justice to strike. But the most dangerous aspect of their plan was that it required them to trust each other completely while barely knowing each other at all. With Evangeline's life depending on Gabriel's skills and Gabriel's success depending on Evangeline's courage, the bond they were forming through shared purpose and mutual respect was becoming something deeper than professional cooperation. But neither of them could afford to examine those feelings while focused on the deadly game they were about to play. Word traveled fast through the territories that Evangeline Rousseau was expecting her lost love to return to Redemption Valley, and the news reached Claude Moreau just as Gabriel had predicted it would, through the network of informants and contacts that every successful criminal maintained to stay ahead of the law. Moreau's reaction to the information was exactly what they had hoped for, a mixture of opportunity and obsession that made the bait irresistible. The gang leader's preparation for his return to Redemption Valley was meticulous, involving detailed study of Mathieu's relationships and habits, combined with the kind of surgical and cosmetic alterations that would make his impersonation flawless to anyone who hadn't known the real man intimately. Moreau's confidence in his ability to become anyone he chose had been reinforced by years of successful deceptions, making him believe that claiming Mathieu's bride would be just another performance in his repertoire of stolen identities. Gabriel's surveillance network, built from contacts throughout the territories who owed him favors or shared his commitment to justice, provided early warning of Moreau's approach to the valley. The gang was traveling carefully, using legitimate business as cover while scouting the terrain and evaluating potential threats, but their leader's obsession with perfecting his Mathieu impersonation made them easier to track than they realized. The first test of their plan came when advance members of Moreau's gang arrived in Redemption Valley posing as drifters looking for work, their real purpose being to gather intelligence about Evangeline's current situation and the security around the ranch. Gabriel's ability to blend into the background as a hired hand allowed him to observe these scouts while they gathered information, confirming that Moreau was indeed planning to claim both the ranch and the woman as his ultimate prize. But Gabriel's observation of the scouts revealed something troubling about Moreau's intentions. The gang leader wasn't just planning to assume Mathieu's identity temporarily, but to eliminate everyone who might eventually see through his deception, including Evangeline herself, once he had tired of the game. The stakes of their trap had just become higher than either of them had imagined, because failure wouldn't just mean escape for a criminal, but death for everyone who knew the truth about who Mathieu Delacroix had really been. When Claude Moreau finally rode into Redemption Valley wearing Mathieu's face and carrying stories that sounded like truth, even Gabriel had to admit that the impersonation was flawless enough to fool anyone who hadn't spent months investigating the real man's death. Moreau's transformation was so complete that looking at him was like seeing a ghost, every detail of appearance and mannerism calculated to resurrect the dead man in the minds of those who had loved him. Evangeline's performance as the joyful bride-to-be was equally masterful, her genuine emotions channeled into a portrayal of a woman whose faith in love had been restored by her beloved's return. But Gabriel could see the pain behind her smile, the way she flinched slightly when Moreau touched her with hands that belonged to a killer rather than the gentle man she had truly loved. The cruelty of forcing her to embrace her beloved's murderer was almost unbearable to witness, but it was necessary to maintain the illusion that would eventually destroy him. Moreau's stories about his time away from the valley were carefully crafted lies that explained his absence while painting him as a hero who had been fighting injustice throughout the territories, tales that were just plausible enough to satisfy anyone who wanted to believe in his innocence. His knowledge of Mathieu's personality and history was extensive enough to answer most questions convincingly, But Gabriel's trained ear detected subtle inconsistencies that revealed the impostor beneath the perfect facade. The wedding preparations that followed Moreau's return were both celebration and torment for Evangeline, who found herself planning a ceremony that would bind her to her beloved's killer while surrounded by friends and neighbors who genuinely believed they were witnessing the reunion of true love. The irony of the situation was lost on everyone except Gabriel, who watched from the shadows as Moreau played the role of devoted fiancé while planning the destruction of everything Mathieu had built. But Gabriel's surveillance also revealed that Moreau was growing suspicious of the hired hand, who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, watching without appearing to watch, present without being intrusive. The gang leader's survival instincts were warning him that something wasn't quite right about the setup, and Gabriel realized that their window for springing the trap was closing faster than they had anticipated. The final week before the wedding brought tensions that crackled like electricity before a thunderstorm. As Moreau's paranoia warred with his obsession to complete the perfect crime by claiming Mathieu's bride and ranch as the ultimate prizes of his impersonation. Gabriel's careful observation revealed that the gang leader was beginning to suspect that his deception might have been discovered, but his narcissistic need to prove his superiority was driving him forward despite his growing unease. Evangeline's emotional state was becoming increasingly fragile as the wedding day approached, the strain of maintaining her performance while preparing to marry her beloved's killer taking a toll that she couldn't hide from Gabriel's concerned eyes. Their relationship had deepened through shared danger and purpose, creating bonds of trust and affection that were complicated by the roles they were forced to play and the secrets they carried. The arrival of Moreau's gang members in the valley, disguised as wedding guests and hired hands, marked the beginning of the final phase of their deadly game. Gabriel's count revealed at least 8 armed men positioned throughout the community, their presence ostensibly celebratory, but actually forming a tactical formation designed to control the valley and eliminate any threats to their leader's plans. The bachelor party that Moreau organized for the night before the wedding was actually a reconnaissance mission designed to identify and neutralize any potential opposition to his control of the valley, with Gabriel being forced to participate while maintaining his cover as a loyal employee who was happy to see his boss finally getting married to the woman he loved. But Gabriel's experience with dangerous criminals told him that Moreau was planning something more than just a wedding ceremony, and his investigation of the gang's activities revealed preparations for violence that suggested the celebration would end in bloodshed designed to eliminate all witnesses to the impostor's deception. The trap they had set was about to snap shut, but Gabriel was no longer certain who would be caught when it did. The eve of the wedding brought Gabriel and Evangeline together for what might be their final conversation, the weight of tomorrow's confrontation making every word precious as they prepared for a battle that would either bring justice or death to the valley that had become their shared responsibility. In the quiet of her farmhouse kitchen, with Moreau and his men camped nearby, they spoke in whispers about courage, love, and the prices that both demanded. "I need you to know," Evangeline said quietly, her voice carrying emotions that had been building throughout their time together, "that if something happens tomorrow, if this plan goes wrong and we don't survive it, I'm grateful that I met you. You gave me back the truth about the man I loved, and that gift is worth whatever price we might pay for it." Her words carried the weight of someone preparing for death, but also the strength of someone who had found something worth dying for. Gabriel's response revealed depths of feeling that surprised them both, as the professional bounty hunter who had spent years avoiding emotional connections found himself caring more about this woman's survival than his own success or reputation. "Mathieu died protecting innocent people," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If that's how my story ends too, I can't think of a better way to go than standing beside someone as brave as you are." The kiss they shared was both farewell and promise, acknowledging feelings that had grown in the shadow of danger while committing to a future that might not exist beyond tomorrow's confrontation. Their love was different from what Evangeline had shared with Mathieu, born of shared purpose rather than innocent courtship, but it was real and powerful and worth fighting for. But their intimate moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, as Moreau himself appeared at the kitchen door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and questions about why the hired hand was spending so much time alone with the bride-to-be. Gabriel's cover was about to be blown, and tomorrow's wedding was about to become tonight's battle for survival. Moreau's suspicions exploded into action as he recognized something familiar about Gabriel's stance and bearing, his criminal instincts finally identifying the threat that had been hiding in plain sight for weeks. "Gabriel Montclair," he said with deadly calm, drawing his weapon as he spoke. "The bounty hunter who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Did you really believe you could fool me with this pathetic charade?" The confrontation that erupted in Evangeline's kitchen was swift and brutal, with Gabriel's speed barely compensating for Moreau's advantage of surprise and position. Furniture exploded into splinters as both men dove for cover, while trading shots that shattered windows and punched holes through walls, their deadly dance turning the domestic space into a battlefield where survival depended on seconds and inches. Evangeline proved that months of frontier life had taught her more than just cooking and cleaning, producing a shotgun from beneath her kitchen sink and using it with accuracy that surprised both men as she provided covering fire for Gabriel while he maneuvered for a better position. Her courage under fire was extraordinary, transforming her from protected victim into active participant in the fight for justice. But Moreau's years of criminal experience made him a formidable opponent who understood that retreat was sometimes the best strategy. Using smoke grenades to cover his escape, while his gang members surrounded the farmhouse and prepared for a siege that would end with the death of everyone who knew the truth about his crimes. The wedding day battle they had planned for had arrived 12 hours early, and the odds were heavily against the defenders. As gun smoke filled the kitchen and bullets continued to fly, Gabriel realized that their careful plan had been shattered by Moreau's paranoia and survival instincts, forcing them into an improvised fight for survival where their only advantages were righteousness and desperation against superior numbers and tactical position. The final confrontation between truth and deception was about to begin, and only one side would survive to see the sunrise. Dawn broke over Redemption Valley with the sound of gunfire echoing across the desert as Moreau's gang surrounded the farmhouse and began the systematic assault that was designed to end with the elimination of all witnesses to their leader's crimes. Gabriel and Evangeline found themselves defending a position that was tactically disadvantageous, but emotionally perfect, the home that Mathieu had built with dreams of love and family, now serving as the final battleground for his memory and justice. The gang's coordinated attack revealed military training and experience that made them far more dangerous than typical outlaws, their use of covering fire and tactical movement suggesting that several of them had served as soldiers before becoming criminals. Gabriel's own military background allowed him to read their patterns and predict their movements, but he was outnumbered 8-1 and running low on ammunition while protecting a position that offered limited cover and no escape routes. Evangeline's marksmanship proved to be exceptional under pressure, her shots finding their targets with deadly accuracy as she defended the upper floor windows, while Gabriel held the ground level against attackers who were trying to breach the doors and walls simultaneously. Her transformation from grieving woman to fierce warrior was complete, driven by rage at the men who had murdered her beloved and stolen his identity to commit unspeakable crimes. But the most devastating moment came when Moreau's voice carried across the battle, offering terms that revealed the depth of his cruelty and the extent of his plans for destroying everything Mathieu had built. "Surrender now," he called out, "and I'll let the woman live long enough to be my wife before I kill her. Keep fighting, and I'll make sure she suffers for days before she dies, and I'll burn this valley to ash just for the pleasure of watching it burn." The offer was designed to break Gabriel's resolve by putting Evangeline's suffering against his sense of justice. But instead, it strengthened both defenders' determination to fight to the death rather than allow such evil to triumph. As bullets continued to shatter the morning air and the farmhouse walls absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lesser structures, Gabriel and Evangeline prepared for what seemed like their final stand against overwhelming odds and implacable evil. The sound that changed everything was the thunder of horses approaching at full gallop, carrying riders whose presence transformed the tactical situation from hopeless siege to winnable battle. Gabriel's network of contacts throughout the territories had finally responded to his coded messages, bringing federal marshals, territorial rangers, and honest bounty hunters who had been tracking Moreau's gang across multiple states and territories. Leading the charge was Marshal Sarah Beaumont, Gabriel's former partner whose reputation for bringing justice to the frontier was matched only by her loyalty to people who fought for the right causes. Her arrival with a dozen armed deputies shifted the balance of power decisively, turning Moreau's siege into a trap that would either capture or kill the most wanted criminals in 3 territories. The gang's response to the arrival of reinforcements revealed their true nature as cowards, who only fought when the odds were heavily in their favor, several members attempting to flee rather than face a fair fight against opponents who were equally well-armed and better motivated. But Gabriel's strategic positioning of the Valley's defenders had anticipated this response, creating a net that would capture or kill anyone who tried to escape justice. Evangeline's role in the battle shifted from desperate defender to coordinating commander, her knowledge of the Valley's terrain allowing her to direct the federal forces to positions where they could maximize their effectiveness while minimizing the risk to innocent residents who lived nearby. Her courage and tactical intelligence impressed even the experienced lawmen who had come to help, proving that frontier women were often more formidable than the men who underestimated them. But Claude Moreau himself proved to be as dangerous in defeat as he had been in apparent victory, using his knowledge of explosives and demolition to turn the farmhouse itself into a potential weapon that could destroy everyone inside if he couldn't escape to fight another day. The final confrontation between justice and evil was about to take place in the ruins of the home that love had built, with the stakes being not just survival, but the future of justice itself in the American frontier. The explosion that rocked the farmhouse foundation was Moreau's desperate attempt to bring down the entire structure and bury his enemies beneath the rubble of their victory, but Gabriel's quick thinking and Evangeline's courage combined to turn the criminal's final gambit into his ultimate defeat. As smoke and debris filled the air, the sound of collapsing timber was joined by Moreau's scream of rage as he realized that his perfect crime had become his perfect downfall. Gabriel's pursuit of the fleeing gang leader led them both through the burning ruins of the farmhouse and into the desert beyond, where the landscape that had hidden so many criminals would serve as the stage for a final confrontation between justice and corruption. The chase was deadly and desperate, 2 men running across ground that offered no mercy to those who stumbled or hesitated, with survival depending on endurance, accuracy, and the will to see justice done. Evangeline's decision to follow them into the desert, despite her wounds from the explosion and battle, demonstrated the depth of her commitment to seeing Mathieu's murderer face justice for his crimes. Her presence transformed the pursuit from a simple manhunt into something more profound, a reckoning that would either restore balance to a world that had been thrown into chaos by evil or prove that some wrongs could never be made right. The final shootout took place in a box canyon where Moreau had hoped to make his last stand, but which became instead the stage for his final performance as he tried one last time to convince his pursuers that he was the innocent victim of mistaken identity. His acting skills were extraordinary, even in defeat, but the evidence Gabriel carried and Evangeline's testimony to the truth made his performance irrelevant to the outcome of their confrontation. But even facing certain death or capture, Moreau's cruelty drove him to one final act of spite, drawing a hidden weapon not to escape or defend himself, but to try to destroy the woman whose love had been the one thing about Mathieu's life that he could never truly steal or possess. The shot that rang out across the desert would determine whether love could triumph over hatred, or whether evil would claim one final victory even in defeat. Gabriel's bullet found its mark just as Moreau's finger tightened on the trigger, the gang leader's final shot going wide as justice finally caught up with the man who had murdered innocents and stolen their identities to commit unspeakable crimes. As Moreau fell to the desert sand, his perfect disguise finally failed him, revealing the true face of a killer who had hidden behind the names and reputations of better men. The dying criminal's final words were a confession that revealed the full scope of his crimes, admitting to the murders of 17 innocent men whose identities he had stolen over the years, including the gentle rancher named Mathieu Delacroix, who had died protecting stagecoach passengers from the very gang that would later use his name and face to commit atrocities. The confession was both closure and vindication for everyone who had been hurt by Moreau's deceptions. Evangeline's reaction to seeing her beloved's killer finally brought to justice was a mixture of relief, grief, and something approaching peace, as she understood that Mathieu's memory had been restored and his murder avenged. The man she had loved had never betrayed her or become the monster depicted in wanted posters. He had died as heroically as he had lived, protecting innocent people from the evil that had ultimately destroyed his reputation along with his life. Gabriel's role as bounty hunter was complete, but his relationship with Evangeline had evolved into something that transcended professional obligation or shared danger. The woman who had hired him to find an outlaw had instead found love with the man who had proven her beloved's innocence, creating a connection forged in truth and tempered by the fires of justice that would endure long after the guns were silenced. But the most important revelation was that justice, though delayed and complicated by deception, had ultimately triumphed over evil through the courage of people who refused to accept easy answers when truth demanded deeper investigation. The frontier might be harsh and unforgiving, but it was also a place where determined people could still make wrongs right when they were willing to risk everything for what they believed in. The federal investigation that followed Moreau's death revealed a criminal network that had operated across multiple territories for years, using the systematic murder and impersonation of honest men to commit crimes while staying ahead of law enforcement agencies that were tracking the wrong faces and chasing the wrong names. Gabriel's evidence became the foundation for a comprehensive effort to identify and clear the names of Moreau's victims while bringing justice to their families. The exhumation and proper burial of Mathieu Delacroix became a community event that drew people from across the territory, as word spread about the innocent man who had been murdered and slandered by criminals who had used his good name to justify their evil deeds. Evangeline's speech at the graveside was both eulogy and vindication, restoring her beloved's reputation while honoring the sacrifice he had made to protect innocent people. Gabriel's decision to hang up his bounty hunter's badge and settle in Redemption Valley surprised many people who had known him only as a relentless pursuer of criminals. But those who had witnessed his investigation of Moreau's crimes understood that he had found something more valuable than any reward money. His partnership with Evangeline had revealed depths of character and capacity for love that he had thought were buried forever beneath years of violence and loss. The rebuilding of the farmhouse became a symbol of renewal and hope for the entire valley as neighbors came together to help construct something stronger and more beautiful than what had been destroyed by Moreau's evil. The new home would be built on the foundation of the old, but designed to accommodate the family that Gabriel and Evangeline planned to build together as they created a future based on truth rather than deception. But the most important aspect of their victory was the precedent it set for frontier justice, proving that careful investigation and patient determination could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal deceptions. The story of how a grieving woman and a dedicated bounty hunter had exposed the truth about stolen identities and murdered innocents would inspire other lawmen to look deeper when cases seemed too simple or resolutions too convenient. The wedding that finally took place in Redemption Valley was everything the previous ceremony would have been if it had been based on truth rather than deception. A celebration of love that had been tested by fire and proven stronger than the forces that had tried to destroy it. Evangeline walked down the aisle wearing her grandmother's dress and carrying wildflowers from the desert where justice had finally been served, her heart no longer broken but healed by love that had grown from shared purpose and mutual respect. Gabriel waited at the altar wearing the badge of a territorial marshal, having accepted appointment to a position that would allow him to continue serving justice while building a life with the woman who had shown him that some things were worth more than any bounty. His transformation from lone hunter to family man was complete, but his commitment to protecting the innocent remained as strong as ever. The ceremony was officiated by Marshal Sarah Beaumont, whose friendship with Gabriel and respect for Evangeline made her the perfect choice to unite two people whose love had been forged in the pursuit of truth and tempered by the fires of justice. Her words about the sacred nature of partnerships that were built on shared values and mutual sacrifice resonated with everyone who had witnessed the couple's journey from professional cooperation to deep personal connection. The reception that followed was a community celebration that brought together federal marshals, territorial rangers, honest bounty hunters, and valley residents who had all played roles in bringing down Moreau's criminal empire. The music and dancing continued long into the night, but the most meaningful moment was when Gabriel and Evangeline shared their first dance as husband and wife to a song about love, surviving every trial and emerging stronger from every test. But the real wedding gift was the knowledge that Mathieu Delacroix's memory had been restored and his sacrifice honored, allowing Evangeline to love again without betraying the past while giving Gabriel the family he had thought was impossible for a man in his dangerous profession. Their marriage represented not just personal happiness, but the triumph of truth over deception, justice over corruption, and love over the forces that tried to destroy everything good and decent in the world. 10 years later, the Montclair Ranch had become the most successful and respected operation in 3 territories. Built on the foundation of hard work, honest dealing, and the kind of reputation that attracted good people while discouraging the bad ones. Gabriel and Evangeline's partnership had proven as effective in business as it had been in bringing criminals to justice, their complementary skills creating prosperity that benefited not just their own family, but the entire community. The children who played in the rebuilt farmhouse yard carried names that honored both the past and the future. Mathieu Gabriel Montclair and Sarah Evangeline Montclair, named for the man whose memory had brought their parents together and the marshal whose friendship had helped them survive the trials that had tested their love. Their laughter filled spaces where gunfire had once echoed, proving that love and hope could indeed triumph over violence and despair. Gabriel's work as a territorial marshal had evolved from hunting individual criminals to building systems of justice that prevented crimes rather than just punishing them after the fact. His experience with Moreau's deceptions having taught him the importance of thorough investigation and careful verification of evidence. His reputation for fairness and competence had made him a model for other lawmen throughout the frontier. Evangeline's role as a community leader had grown from her survival of tragedy to become a source of strength and wisdom for other women who faced loss and betrayal in the harsh frontier environment. Her story of love lost and found, of truth discovered and justice served, had become legend throughout the territories, inspiring others to never give up hope even when circumstances seemed impossible. But the most important legacy of their journey was the proof that love could indeed conquer all when it was combined with courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The woman who had hired a bounty hunter to find the outlaw she thought she loved had instead found a partner who helped her discover that real love was even more powerful than she had imagined, and that some stories of heartbreak were actually stories of triumph in disguise. Their love had been tested by deception, violence, and loss, but it had emerged stronger than ever, proving that when two hearts were united in pursuit of truth and justice, no force on earth could ultimately defeat them.